Tick, Tick, Boom is a semi-autobiographical musical by the late Jonathan Larson that tells the story of a young theater composer struggling to navigate love, friendship, and the pressures of being a creative in New York City when it feels like time isn't on your side.
Hello. Hi. Welcome. I'm Jonathan Larson.
That theme of running out of time is particularly poignant when you know the history of Larson and how he passed away from an aortic aneurysm the day of Rent's first off-Broadway preview performance. In Lin-Manuel Miranda's directorial debut, they mix together that semi-autobiographical musical with some biopic elements as we dive further into Larson's life as someone with a creative dream and fears of being unable to achieve them. Kristen here, and I grew up loving Jonathan Larson and Rent. I remember doing a bunch of community theater and college productions of the show, and if you want to see a little trip down memory lane, here you go. So it goes without saying that the show and Larson have a really important place in my heart. And now, thanks to people who have always loved and supported Larson as well, we have a film adaptation of Tick, Tick, Boom that dives even further into his life. With its raw energy and perfectly imperfect music, Tick, Tick, Boom is a beautiful tribute to Jonathan Larson, his legacy, musical theater, and aspiring creatives. I love how they look at turning 30 like another coming of age.
I can't keep wasting my time, Mike. I turned 30 in 2 days.
And I'm running out of time!
It's so easy to be like, man, I'm getting old, but 30 is still pretty young, and whether you're 30 or 50 or 80, it's never too late to go after your dreams. You just gotta put yourself out there and keep trying. There were a lot of really great songs in this film. Some of my favorites were 3090, No More, Sunday, and Come to Your Senses. Andrew Garfield really embodied Jonathan Larson, and Lin-Manuel Miranda was the perfect fit to direct this film, especially because he has such a similar background to Larson. So today we're gonna be exploring all of the Easter eggs I could find to Broadway, to musical theater, to Rent. Let's get into it. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to say Rent a lot in this video, so if you were like, oh, I'm going to take a shot every time you say Rent, you might be in a world of hurt. But hey, give it a shot. All right, let's do this. The original Tick, Tick, Boom made its debut under the title Boho Days in 1990, where Jonathan performed the one-man rock monologue at Second Stage Workshop. And this film opens with Andrew Garfield as Jonathan performing that show. They use that one-man show as a way to narrate and keep the story going throughout the film. The use of the camera footage throughout the film also feels very Mark from Rent in how they show flashbacks and capture memories that they're looking back on. In some of the footage they include, we even get to see real-life articles and pieces from Rent, like this clip of Anthony Rapp, who starred as Mark on Broadway. It's amazing to see how they were able to painstakingly recreate everything from the diner to Jonathan's apartment to even the clothes he wears, thanks to all the footage that Jonathan Larson actually captured back then. Like this Moondance diner shirt that Jonathan wore, Andrew wore in the film, and Lynn even wore at the premiere. Here we get our first shot of the Superbia Musical, which was a real-life musical that Jonathan Larson was working on. It was originally intended to be a futuristic rock retelling of George Orwell's 1984. Despite winning production and development grants and awards and doing various productions, the show was never fully produced. And now, after seeing all of that work that went into all of that, I would love to see a fully produced production of Superbia. Getting into the actors, so many of them have connections to Jonathan Larson, to Broadway, so I'm going to just talk about some of the main ones. Director Lin-Manuel Miranda is a Pulitzer Prize and Tony Award-winning creative, best known for Hamilton and In the Heights, and he was just as influenced by Larson as any of us. When he was 17 years old, he was first introduced to Rent, and soon after that started writing one-act musicals. And then 4 years later, in 2001, he saw Tick, Tick, Boom off-Broadway for the first time, which really hit home for him. In 2014, he even starred as John in the Encore's production of Tick, Tick, Boom alongside Karen Olivo as Susan and Leslie Odom Jr. as Michael. Now, while this is Andrew Garfield's first time singing, he is no stranger to the stage. He starred in Broadway's revival of Death of a Salesman in 2012, and he even won a Tony for his role in Angels in America. Three-time Tony nominee Robin De Jesus takes on the role of Michael in this film,
while I will always remember him and love him from the movie Camp.
Theater kids know what I'm talking about, and he made his Broadway debut in Rent at the age of 21.
And also starred as Sunny in Broadway's In the Heights.
Vanessa Hutchins, who plays Caressa, might be best known for her role as Gabriella in the High School Musical franchise.
But she also made her Broadway debut in Gigi, and she played Mimi in Rent at the Hollywood Bowl and starred in Fox's Rent Live as Maureen.
Post-star MJ Rodriguez, who plays Carolyn, also got her start in Rent as Angel in the off-Broadway production. Joshua Henry, best known for roles in Hamilton, Chicago, and Carousel, plays Roger, who is named after one of the main characters in Rent, and also is named after Roger Bart, who's a Broadway actor who also shows up as himself later on in the diner scenes. He was a fellow waiter alongside Jonathan. He participated in the development of Superbia, and he even sang background vocals on the original Tick, Tick, Boom. Judith Light, who plays Rosa, made her Broadway debut in A Doll's House,
and later won 2 consecutive Tonys for her performances in Other Desert Cities and The Assembled Parties.
And there are even more Broadway actors that appear in this film, so we will get to some of that later on. Another way the team honored Larson was by having his idol Stephen Sondheim be a character in this film. In the original show, he's just mentioned.
And in this film, they first hint at him by showing a record of West Side Story. Now, when we get into the story, we start off with the answering machine that feels very Rent, as that was a recurring motif in the musical.
We hear a message from Deborah talking about having a hard time getting the speakers to work for Susan's dance show,
which sounds very much like a parallel to Joanne and Mark struggling to fix Maureen's sound issues in Rent. Jonathan walks into the apartment and says, "Hey Pookie" to Michael, which is what Maureen called Joanne.
Kiss Pookie.
We find out that Michael left the arts to get a quote-unquote real job, which also feels very similar to Benny's backstory in Rent. At a party Larson's throwing for Susan, a man asks him what he does, and he says, "I'm the future of musical theater, Scott."
This feels like a call out to Larson fans and just recognizing all the things that he's achieved, and that he really did change the game when it comes to musical theater.
During the party, John gets everyone singing Boho Days with its references to Bohemia, and that scene with John and Susan on the rooftop, it gave me vibes of like a more chill La Vie Boheme and I Should Tell You break between Roger and Mimi in Rent.
Something that's very specific to Stephen Sondheim, Lin-Manuel Miranda, and Jonathan Larson is that they have very specific sounds when it comes to their music. And even listening to the music here, it really has that pop rock sound that you really think of when you hear Rent.
And Lin-Manuel Miranda shared in a Q&A about the film that they went to the Library of Congress and dug deep into the archives of Jonathan Larson's work to use as much as possible. Even the jingle that you hear on the car radio for CNN, that is a real jingle Jonathan Larson wrote, and so much of the music in between the songs is Jonathan Larson's real music. He said that they wanted to be able to say "score by Jonathan Larson" by the end of this film, and I think that is so beautiful. In the introduction to No More, John and Michael enter Michael's fancy apartment building, and they call out an old white lady with a tiny dog, which immediately made me think of the Akita Avita line from Today For You in Rent. Throughout the film, John is working towards this workshop of his musical Superbia being set up by Ira Weitzman, the head of musical theater at Playwright Horizons. That is a real person who worked on setting up this workshop of Superbia. The issue here, though, is that Jonathan is missing one final song to complete the project, and the fact that he's struggling with coming up with that perfect song really reminded me of Roger and how he was trying to write a song to leave behind in case he succumbed to his disease. With John as a songwriter and Susan as a dancer, they really felt like Roger and Mimi personified. It turns out his idol Stephen Sondheim also agreed that he needed an additional song in the show. We go inside a BMI workshop where he had encouraged Larson and even gave him musical advice, and during those scenes we even get to see so many incredible composers and lyricists portraying aspiring composers, including Chad Begwelin, Nick Blamire, Eli Bolin, Jason Robert Brown, Aisa Davis, Amanda Green, Chiara Alegria Hudes, Joe Iconis, Tom Kitt, Alex Lacamore, Stephen Levinson, Jamie Lozano, Dave Malloy, Matthew McCollum, Grace McLean, Helen Park, Stephen Schwartz, Mark Scheinman, Matthew Sklar, Georgia Stitt, Shayna Taub, Janine Tesori, and Stephen Trask. We then see Jonathan calling producers and directors in the industry to invite them to his workshop, including Sondheim, Joe Papp, Bernie Gersten,
the Schubert Organization,
and the La Mama Institution. Later, Jonathan, Michael, and Susan are watching Sunday in the Park with George, remarking on the incredible Bernadette Peters, and this is foreshadowing of what's to come. While Jonathan struggles to come up with a song, we hear snippets of Day by Day from Godspell, Let the Sun Shine In from Hair, and It's the End of the World as We Know It and I Feel Fine by R.E.M. These feel like particularly particularly interesting and very relevant choices when it comes to Larson. Godspell is about the formation of a community that carries on Jesus' teachings after he's gone, which could parallel the community carrying on Jonathan's work after he's gone. Day by Day is a folk rock ballad that's written like a prayer about taking things slowly each day to see and love more clearly. Hair is a revolutionary musical that broke ground in the theater world as a rock musical, and Let the Sun Shine In is a call to action to change the world and reject the darkness of war. And REM was an American rock band, and their song It's the End of the World as We Know It and I Feel Fine was a stream of consciousness song that the lead singer Michael Stipe said came from flipping TV channels and just seeing what was going on in the world. It's sort of about being aware of what's going on in day-to-day life.
And all of these things just seem really relevant when it comes to embodying who Jonathan Larson is and the type of music that he was creating.
In addition to all of these references, we also see a bunch of Broadway shows from that time in a newspaper that Jonathan is reading. Now this might be a bit of a reach, but there was this moment of Jonathan reflected in glass of the diner that really reminded me of Usnavi being reflected in the glass of the bodega of In the Heights. Later, Jonathan is watching the news and they're talking about the AIDS pandemic. Earlier at his party, his friend Freddie had talked about his T-cell count being fine, but later in the week it's low and he's admitted to the hospital. This feels like the start of Jonathan realizing the bigger things that are going on in the world that maybe he should be addressing through his music. And Caroline also talks about how Freddie couldn't stop shivering from his fever. This line reminded me of Light My Candle and Mimi's struggle in Rent.
I know you're shivering. I used to shiver like that.
I have no heat, I
used
told
to sweat.
I got a cold.
I used to be a junkie.
Now, for a really exciting performance, we got to see a ton of Broadway legends connect during Sunday. First of all, the song takes inspiration from the Sunday finale in Sunday in the Park with George by Sondheim. We see Lin-Manuel Miranda making a cameo cooking in the diner, and then we get to see a whole bunch of cameos from Broadway legends Andre DeShields, Brian Stokes Mitchell, Cheetah Rivera, Chuck Cooper, Joel Grey, Beth Malone, Howard McGillen, Bebe Neuwirth, Felicia Rashad, Bernadette Peters. We see Hamilton stars Renee Elise Goldsberry and Philippa Sue, and of course Rent icons Adam Pascal, Daphne Rubin Vega, and Wilson Germain Heredia. New York Theater Workshop artistic director James C. Nicola and Broadway actor Roger Bart also appear as featured diners. And in real life, James was in charge of the New York Theater Workshop at the time and he helped put up Rent. And Roger, as we mentioned before, was a fellow waiter. He participated in the Superbia development and he was a background singer on the original Tick Tick Boom. So I love that they brought in the choir of Jonathan Larson's dreams with all of these Broadway actors, but also still paid tribute to the people who were a part of building all of this up back in the day. Diving into the archives of Larson's past work, the team dug up Play Game and has Tariq Trotter from The Roots perform it. I also thought it was really funny to see him later in line auditioning for Old Deuteronomy and Cats. We also get another callback to Godspell when Jonathan is selling his records and he leaves all of them,
including Hair,
but takes Godspell, and the woman behind the counter calls out Day by Day. And I have to say, one of my favorite references is when Jonathan is struggling to write the song and he starts playing the chords for what will eventually become One Song Glory, Roger's song in Rent. And there are just so many levels as to why this worked so well.
One song, glory, one song before I go, glory, one song leave behind.
This is the song that Roger performs about wanting to create that big song that will live beyond him. That song also talks about that fear of not being able to achieve that goal before leaving this world.
So really it just comes so full circle when you hear that little tinkering on the piano of that song.
Desperate for money to afford one more musician for his workshop, Jonathan ends up going to Michael's corporate office to participate in a focus group, and everyone is super impressed by him, but it's clear that there's a bit of a sellout feeling for him around being in that corporate environment, and that really reminded me of the scene in Rent where Mark feels like he's selling out by going to talk to Alexi Darling. Inside the focus group, they also share their thoughts on America. And you see the word Santa Fe on the big pad of paper in the background, and just hearing those words America and Santa Fe automatically reminded me of the song Santa Fe that Colin sings in Rent.
Let's open up a restaurant in Santa Fe.
Before the workshop, Rosa calls John,
and she ends up getting off the phone saying, get Hal Prince on the line. Hal Prince was another American theatrical director and producer, known for working on West Side Story, Sweeney Todd, and more. John also has been getting a lot of notices about getting his power turned off, and they finally do it right before he comes up with his brilliant song.
The power blows!
In Rent, their power goes out as well, and we see Jonathan light a candle, which felt like a subtle nod to the song Light My Candle. I mean, he could have found a flashlight. He used a candle. Following the workshop, John talks to Rosa, who tells him that while people loved the show, They can't produce it. It requires a cast of thousands with special effects, and she suggests that he writes what he knows. Perhaps he took that to heart, and that's why he wrote such a personal and stripped down project with the next thing that he worked on, which was Tick, Tick, Boom. However, this rejection really hits Jonathan hard. He thinks back to his idol, Stephen Sondheim, who was only 27 when his first show went to Broadway, and feels even worse like he's running out of time. However, he gets a reality check when Michael reveals that he's HIV positive. In the song Why, Larson looks back on his friendship with Michael, and there are a lot of references to West Side Story, which was the musical that he did with Michael in high school, which was the first show that Sondheim had go to Broadway. Jonathan goes back to Michael's apartment to encourage him to join a support group called Friends Indeed, and this is a real support group that was founded in 1991 as a response to the AIDS crisis. Jonathan Larson attended several meetings in real life, and the support group in Rent was actually based on his experiences there, including specific references to their philosophy of no day but today and questions about losing your dignity. When Sondheim calls John to talk about Superbia on the phone, you can hear that iconic "speak" message that was in Rent. At the end of the film, Susan and John finally make up, and John says, "I know," to kind of let her know that she doesn't have to explain herself, and they go on to discuss what's next for them. That really reminded me of I Should Tell You from Rent.
I know, oh no, who knows where, who goes there.
As the film wraps up,
We even see actor Christopher Jackson entering the theater.
they tell the final moments of John's life, creating Tick, Tick, Boom, then creating Rent, which ran on Broadway for 12 years. We see footage of Idina Menzel. They talk about the impact that John had on musical theater and storytelling, and they talk about how he unfortunately never got to see it happen due to the sudden aortic aneurysm that he had at 35 years old. So it turns out that John was right, and he was running out of time, which brings a whole new meaning to his work, and the fact that he happened to write an autobiographical musical that is able to continue his story and tell his legacy.
Do you know how many Jonathan Larsons there are? One.
In the final song, Louder Than Words, we see that John is finally writing about what is important and real to him. He's discussing shaking up the nation, bringing on a revolution, waking up a generation, which are things that he brings up in the later musical Rent.
And the time keeps ticking. Tick, tick. There's not enough time. I went to 3 friends' funerals last year, and nobody is doing enough. I'm not doing enough.
Try writing about what you know.
In the audience, we get to see a little cameo from Hamilton and In the Heights star Christopher Jackson, and we see final pictures from Rent, and finally real footage from his life that informed the film, and you could just see how much detail went into recreating all of these original moments from Jonathan Larson's life. I think that they did a phenomenal job in paying tribute to him and bringing him to life for a new audience and a new generation to be inspired by his work, and I would love to hear from you guys. What did you think of this movie?
Did you catch any other references I missed? I would love to hear your thoughts.
Consider subscribing if you like my videos, and if you want to talk more TV and movies with me outside of the comment section, check out the exclusive Discord available on my Patreon at patreon.com/kmaldo. If you like this one, you can check out more of my videos right over here. See ya!